Politics, policy, and power. These three forces shape our society, influencing everything from the price of fuel to how much tax we pay. But behind the scenes, there's another force shaping these forces: money. Political donations have become the lifeblood of election campaigns and policy, especially in Australia. The big question is, who's funding this machine and what do they get in return? Political donations in Australia are no small matter. In the 2022 to 2023 financial year alone, over $440 million was poured into the coffers of political parties and candidates across the country. But this isn't a new phenomenon. Over the past 2 decades, nearly $1 billion in donations have shaped Australia's political landscape. Many of these donations come from everyday Australians, but the lion's share, more than 70%, come from a handful of wealthy individuals and corporations. These are the people and industries that stand to gain the most from political decisions, be it tax breaks, industry regulation, or government contracts. So who are the biggest players in Australia's political donation game? Leading the pack is Clive Palmer. Through his company Mineralogy, Palmer has spent millions, $7.1 million in 2023 alone on his own United Australia Party, using his wealth from the mining industry to influence political discourse and shape policy. But Palmer is just one of many. Anthony Pratt, the cardboard king, the head of Pratt Holdings, contributed over $1 million to the Labour Party in the same period. Pratt's companies are major players in the global packaging industry business, and his donations reflect the growing influence of business in Australian politics. Beyond individual donors, entire industries are funneling money into the political system. Banks like ANZ, Commonwealth Bank, as well as major consulting firms like PwC and Deloitte, contribute hundreds of thousands of dollars every election cycle. These donations raise concerns about the influence corporations have on government policies, whether it's tax reforms, environmental regulations, or financial services reforms. The mining industry is perhaps the most visible player in the donation game. For years, mining companies have funneled millions of dollars into Australian politics. Companies like Glencore and BHP make substantial contributions to both sides of the political spectrum, ensuring that they have a say in policies related to mining royalties, environmental standards, and resource management. Then there's the banking sector. ANZ, Commonwealth Bank, and Westpac have all made sizable donations to political parties, often splitting contributions between Labour and Liberal to ensure influence no matter who's in power. In the 2022 to 2023 financial year, these banks were among the top corporate donors, seeking to influence policies on banking regulations, interest rates, and financial services reform. And we can't forget consulting firms. PwC, Deloitte, and KPMG contribute hundreds of thousands of dollars to both parties. Their goal? To secure lucrative government contracts for everything from infrastructure projects to health services. These firms often play both sides, ensuring that they stay in the government's good books no matter who's in power. 2 industries in particular have dramatically ramped up their political influence: gambling and housing. The gambling lobby, led by major players like Sportsbet and Clubs New South Wales, contributed more than $2.165 million to political parties in the 2021-2022 financial year, a 40% increase over the previous year. These donations were split almost evenly between Labour and the Liberal National Coalition, both of which have received significant financial support from the gambling sector. Advocates from groups like Alliance for Gambling Reform argue that the donations distort the democratic process, as politicians are swayed to maintain the status quo, rather than pursue much-needed gambling reforms that would reduce harm to vulnerable communities. Meanwhile, the housing lobby, developers, construction firms, and real estate groups are major contributors, with donations to both sides of politics. Housing affordability has become a critical issue here in Australia, and these donations raise concerns about the influence of developers on policies related to zoning laws, housing supply, and rent controls. Critics argue that these financial tiers hinder the development of affordable housing solutions for struggling Australians. While many donations are disclosed, much of the money flowing into Australian politics remains hidden, known as dark money. These are donations that, thanks to loopholes in the law, don't have to be reported. In Australia, donations under $15,000 don't have to be disclosed, and the donors often split their contributions into small amounts to avoid scrutiny. According to the Centre for Public Integrity, dark money accounts for up to 85% of all political donations in Australia. This lack of transparency means that voters often have no idea who's funding their candidates and what those donors expect in return, and it's a system that's ripe for reform. The push for reform is growing. Advocacy groups like the Australian Institute and political figures like Green Senator Larissa Waters have long called for more transparency in the political donations. They want real-time disclosure of donations, bans on donations from industries like mining and tobacco, and restrictions on contributions from corporations seeking government contracts. In fact, in early 2023, the Greens proposed legislation that would require any company seeking a government contract to refrain from donating to political parties 6 months before and after applying for the contract. This bill, according to Senator Waters, is a common sense step towards reducing corporate influence on government decisions. But even with reforms, critics argue that political establishment is resistant to change. With billions of dollars on the line, Both major parties have a vested interest in maintaining the current system, which allows them to keep receiving massive donations from their biggest backers. So what does all this money buy? It buys influence. From tax reforms to environmental regulations, the industries making these donations often have a direct stake in the outcomes. For instance, mining giants like Rio Tinto, BHP, have long fought against environmental regulations that would curtail their operations, particularly around carbon emissions and land rehabilitation. Similarly, the banking and financial sectors have influenced policies relating to financial deregulation and tax breaks. By contributing significant sums of money to both Labour and Liberal parties, these institutions ensure that they have a seat at the table when decisions are made about lending practices, interest rates, and banking sector oversight. As a result, policies that can lead to stronger regulation of the finance industry are often watered down. The gambling lobby too has a vested interest in preventing stricter gambling reforms. Despite rising public concern over the problem of gambling, politicians are often hesitant to enact strong reforms due to the powerful influence of industry lobby groups like Clubs in New South Wales and corporate betting companies. These donations help ensure that the gambling industry remains largely unregulated, protecting their profits while vulnerable communities bear the brunt of gambling-related harm. Ultimately, the influence of large donors raises critical questions about the integrity of Australia's democracy. When decisions are shaped by corporate interests, the voices of everyday Australians, those without the means to donate millions of dollars, often drowned out. Whether it's housing affordability, healthcare, or environmental sustainability, the policies that affect our day-to-day lives are frequently compromised by the priorities of a wealthy few.